Tonight, Steve Smith and I talk Red Green, the Grey Cup, books, touring, Smith & Smith, the Comedy Mill, Red Fisher, Tiny Talent Time, Ed Sullivan, Jack Benny, John Candy, Billy Van, Laurel and Hardy, and Bob and Ray. And this is just part one. It's Up All Night with Bob. Like, stay, subscribe. You don't want to miss this one. Folks, for 15 seasons and 300 episodes, my guest tonight entertained Canadian and U.S. audiences alike as handyman Red Green on The Red Green Show, a character he continues to inhabit on the Possum Lodge podcast on Patreon, which he currently co-hosts with his son, Dave Smith. He is a show business institution, a member of the Order of Canada, but perhaps most importantly, my very first boss in big-time TV writing. Please extend a very special welcome to a very special guest today, Mr. Steve Smith. How are you, sir?
I'm pretty well, Rob. Great to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a long time. I realized the other day it's been 17 years since the show. I know you know this.
Yeah.
Does it, when the show was on for 15, which is a good long run, and does it seem longer since it's been on than it was on? Because it certainly doesn't to me.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. And the last 10 years or so, I've been doing live tours, and like a kid will come up to me, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and he's a fan of the show. And I said, you know what? When I stopped doing the show, you weren't even alive. And when I started doing the show, your dad wasn't alive. I mean, these are huge lumps to get over, you know.
By the way, I wore the Tie Cats.
I saw that
sweatshirt just for you today. Well, my dad was also from Hamilton, so I feel I've got a number of connections to the. Were you watching the Grey Cup last year, and did you lose any money on the Tie Cats?
Oh my goodness! All I remember from the Grey Cup is that it was the world's shortest punt, 9 yards, a 9-yard punt. How do you do that?
Yeah.
I could kick it 10 yards.
I mean, at least. Yeah. But you're there. You're in Hamilton. You're home. You make your home in Hamilton, and you're spending about a half of the year in Florida. Is that correct?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you imagine a time when you'd be down there full time, or will you always come? Will you always come home?
You know, I'm Canadian, and it's hard to get over that. You know, like when somebody comes to my door, I have no expectation they're armed. You know, and I like that.
That makes sense. I'm in the San Fernando Valley, and I sort of peer out my kitchen window anytime there's a knock on the door, and then we take that information and we go from there as to how we're gonna approach the door. Peter Keleghan, who was so brilliantly played Ranger Gord on the show, was here just a couple of weeks ago, and he extends his warmest greetings, by the way. How often do you get to see the gang?
Well, 4 of them are involved in the podcast, like Peter's in, and Bob Bainborough and Pat McKenna and Jeff Lumby, although Jeff Lumby lives in France now. So we do his stuff, you know, across the Atlantic. So
Jeff lives in France. What brought him over there? This is Winston of sewage, Rothschild sewage and septic sucking services.
If your eyes are stinging, my phone should be ringing. Yeah. That guy. Yeah, you know, he's got 3 big dogs, and they're kind of like their kids, and they wanted to retire somewhere where they could take their dogs. And Julie, his wife, is of French Canadian origin, so the language was easy for her. So they bought a place, and they just moved, and away they went. It's been a couple of years now.
Oh, that's neat. And what about Pat McKenna? Is he close by?
Yeah, he's near me. He's up around Guelph, and he comes in and does the Herald thing. So it's good. It's a bit nostalgic, and we're doing new stuff too. So it's a combination.
You have no interest in girls, do you, Harold?
I'm not dressed like this to impress girls.
Well, it's working, believe me.
I'm going to be officiating the big event, the running of the bulls.
No, Harold, it's not going to be a running of the bulls. We had a few problems.
What kind of problems?
Well, during the test run, we found out that Junior Singleton's starter pistol is not a starter pistol. So right away, we're down to 1 bolt.
Could you imagine a time when you did it on camera again, or are you just not interested at this point?
No, you know, I really enjoy what I'm doing while I'm doing it, and I don't like to go backwards. the reason I took on touring was I wanted to do something I'd never done before. It's not like I started as a stand-up and then went into TV. I never did theater or anything, so that was new. Right. So I wouldn't go back to television. The live touring was certainly the most enjoyable thing of my whole career. And now the podcast, I really enjoy doing it because I'm working with my son, I think.
So the show ended in 2005, and then a few years later, so you hit the road with the live show, which was a huge success, wasn't it?
Yeah, I got to tell you how that happened. I was playing golf with the chairman of the publishing company, and he said to me, if you wanted to write a book in the red green character, we'd publish anything you wanted to write. I thought, well, that's a nice compliment, but if I say no, he'll never ask again. So I said yes. I wrote a book called How to Do Everything.
Oh, that's right.
And then they wanted me to, do a book tour, right? That's a terrible thing to do. Like you go out to Saskatchewan, to sell 10 books. I said, right. I'll buy 11 not to go.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, instead of just doing a book tour, why don't I see if I can put a one-man show together and tour with that? Now I can do signed books while I'm there. So then away we went. My first one was in Minneapolis. I loved it, and then away we did. Ended up doing 4 tours.
So the guy whips his badge out, opens it up. He says to Buster, "Can you read that? See what that says? Drug Enforcement Officer. You know what that means? That means I'm sanctioned by the federal government to go wherever I want, whenever I want." Buster says, "Okay, fine, go." So of course that's the first place the guy goes. About 30 seconds later, Buster hears a blood-curdling scream. He looks up, there's a guy running full tilt across the field, being chased by Buster's bull. So Buster yells out, "The badge, show him the badge."
That's amazing. What was the name of the last one? It had a great name. I don't have it written down here.
Well, it was called This Could Be It. The idea was if I wanted to do it, I would say, "This is definitely it." And then one I thought that one should have been it, Yeah. But you know what? The last tour, This Could Be It. It was so well received, and it just felt like the perfect time to say goodbye. It's like the way we ended the show. I decided to end the show because it just felt like an exit ramp. I'm good at that. Yeah.
Well, and also so many folks, I imagine, getting to see you in person who were never able to make it up to Toronto for a taping, right. And that must have been a real, Peter and I were going way back to his earliest days as a cast member on the Comedy Mill, which was one of the 2 shows that you did at CHCH prior to Red Green. And I want to talk a little bit about how that started, because your ability to make television in an industry that seems designed to prevent you from doing it has always impressed me. And it's a skill I've tried to relearn many times since. But Peter said, quite earnestly, that the Comedy Mill was the best time he had ever had making anything. And Peter, as you know, has a long resume. And, honestly, I've come to feel the same way about my years on Red Green. And I know why I think that is, but I wanted to ask, well, first of all, I just wanted you to hear it because it's a nice thing to know, but also, I think I want to know why you think that might be. What was it about your way of working, about the environment you created around you, that engendered that? Because that ain't nothing in a TV show.
I know exactly what it is. I embrace apathy. Like no one in Canada could care less about what I was doing. So, they just didn't get in the way. So, but I didn't take that as an insult. I took it as an opportunity. If you don't, right. At that time when I started, like in the late 70s, Canadian television to the broadcaster was the cost of doing business. It was like a tax. Okay, right. We have to do this. We have to spend this. Just leave us alone. Don't bug them. Like, don't come and ask for anything. But if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. And that's what. My whole life, I've really just wanted to be left alone. I have a great idea, and I want to see it come through. See it come to fulfillment.
Right.
So, but I got to tell you a story about Peter, because when we were casting Comedy Mill, Peter comes in to do a monologue. I sent them all the same monologue, and he's Peter's a good-looking guy, right?
Sure.
He's too good-looking to be funny, So he comes in. He comes in, and he's got, for some reason, he has a stuffed teddy bear that he holds on his knee, right? no reference to it. And I don't ask, So he's halfway through this monologue and he gets stuck. He can't remember the next line. He picks up the teddy bear, turns it over, and reads the next line off the butt of the teddy bear. Okay, you got the job, buddy.
Yeah. He told me, I didn't realize this because I knew. So by the time I came on the show very late, it was already an institution. I was at 2001, I guess it was season 11. By that point, Ranger Gord's tower was already in a corner of the studio space on the top of the CBC building on Front Street. But in the earliest days, and I did not know this, it was a children's treehouse.
Absolutely.
And he said it swayed, and I found a clip, and boy, you could see it swaying in the.
It was windy day. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the cameraman was up on a ladder because there wasn't room for him inside the tree. We never talked about what was going on because we would do that. We do Ranger Gord's all in one day, right? So you could be topical or current trending. Well, that ended up making the series evergreen. Like it could run today, and we're not mentioning it. We didn't actually know what was going on, so we weren't faking it.
The rabid fandom that is still there, and as you say, because there was nothing topical, they're still nuts about it, and they're introducing their kids to it. And did you have that in your head at the time, that the evergreenness of it? Was that intentional?
No, Rob, and I'm sure this is the core of everybody that does this kind of stuff, is that, I'm the audience.
Right.
I've always been the audience for my sense of humor. And I'm just so amazed and shocked and gratified that there are people out there like me, that you can find a constituency. I mean, that's been the hugest shock. I didn't know any of this until the second season of the show, when it was canceled by CHCH in Hamilton here. And the letters are pouring in from, it was only on in, that station. So it's all from people from St. Catharines and London and everything, sending me this, do what you got to do. You got to keep the show on the air. And I was like, holy cow, somebody's actually shares my unusual sense of humor. But I've always been the audience. And when I started to realize there's people like me, then it really galvanized me to make sure I do what I think is funny, and let's live or die by that.
Right, which I always have held that's how I wish every TV show were made that way. And I often quote, and because I heard it a number of times, because you would often mention it in the warm up or between scenes. Your initial pitch, and I don't know if this was for Red Green or Smith and Smith or Comedy Mill, but I assume it was sort of the at least the philosophy.
I know what you're going to say. It was.
You know what I'm going to say.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say.
Well, you can give me enough money.
Money, I can do something, but not enough that you care what it is.
Right. And I always just felt like if more shows were made that way, more and better things would get made. Now, there may be some failures along the way, but give everybody $1.25 and see what comes back.
That's always the way I felt that the BBC did business. They would choose a talent and just let them run, or her run.
Yeah. Well, I think, and part of it, for me is that, when you're on a show down here, you're trying to please a showrunner, but the showrunner is trying to please a couple of non-writing producers, and the non-writing producers are collectively trying to please the studio, and all together you're trying to please the network. So there's so many hands in the pot. And, in Canada, even theoretically fewer layers, but often more non-writing producers, and no shortage of people working at the network, wanting to give notes. But on Red Green, all we had to do was please you. You were the ultimate arbiter of what was going to work, and what wasn't. And to me, that again, I think that's sort of what accounts for, its longevity. I want to talk just for a second about Smith and Smith, because I was looking at some old tape. And this is, of course, famously where Red Green was initially born. Right. And that came out of Red Fisher. Yeah. Can you describe Red Fisher for people who don't know who that was?
The man who thought nothing would bore you.
Yes.
It was his job to fill the half hour. It was your job to make it interesting. I really admired that. And he had poems. He wrote his own poetry and stuff. And I was really just making fun of him, and away it went.
So the handyman stuff, the actual physical stuff, all that didn't come in until the actual Red Green show. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, when we kind of, my wife decided to retire. We had two sons at that point, and one of us had to be home because they were turning into teenagers, and she knew their names, so she got the job. And I thought, what am I going to do? Well, I had always enjoyed the Red Green character, and we'd always had fan mail right from the get-go. We'd always had fan mail on that character, and I'd been offered a series to do. CH used to run the hockey games on Wednesday night, and they never knew when the game was going to finish. It might finish at 20 to 11. Might finish. They needed something to fill in, so they asked me if I would do the Red Green thing. You know, I'm thinking, well, that would kill the character for you just to sit there and talk for 20 minutes. You know. But it planted the seed. So I thought, okay, that would be fun to do a Red Green thing. And Rick Green was my writing partner in those days. And so he and I sort of brainstormed, how can we take this character and expand it enough to make a half-hour show? And that's where we come up with all the handyman stuff and the advice to middle-aged guys. And then he brought over to my house a Super 8 film cartridge that I had a projector, and we went down the laundry room. We projected on the wall. He'd been to Europe, and it's all no sound, you know. And he'd done these things where it looked like he would pot his eye on the side of a Swiss Alp building. And anyway, I just thought, oh, we got to use that. So then we got to do it no sounds too, and it was a voiceover. So that became the Adventures with Bill segment.
I'm really putting the tension on there and get her down and okay, gonna let her go, but he had wound it the wrong way. Which was unfortunate.
A brilliant physical comedian, Rick. And then later you would bring in, well, Harold would do, Harold did one once, or Patrick did one once. I must have seen it 6 or 7 times in the same day, you know, between rehearsals and show. And every single time I would just die. It was a 2-man saw. It was him and Walter. And the saw at one point, and I'm not going to be able to do this, but the saw got caught in Harold's belt, and Pat, and this is around the same time he already had the back trouble, by the way.
Oh yeah,
like he was going like that.
And now it's you're caught.
It was taking it with him, and he just had this look on his face like, whoa. And geez, it was just the funny. He was so funny. A big Jerry Lewis fan, right?
Yeah, you can see that. You know, one of the things we're doing in our podcast now is I go back and find clips from the show, and obviously just the audio on our podcast. But Harold's there to bring everybody up to date and comment on what was actually going on behind the scenes and those things. So, and what I end up listening to is how great he was for all those years. I mean, you take a little clip and he's just so, you don't need to see it. You can picture it just from hearing it. Yes.
Well, his voice sounds like somebody who's kind of lurching around the room. He just,
exactly.
There was a sketch on one of the Smith and Smiths I was looking at, and it was called, oh my God, Steve, I laughed for 10 minutes. It was called Infinitesimal Talent Time. Maybe you could describe briefly Tiny Talent Time with host Bill Lawrence.
Oh my gosh. So they have these little kids who are just kids. They're not Hollywood kids. They're just kids. They're from Sudbury, and they tap dance with only 1 foot, you know?
Yeah.
It was just the oddest thing. You know what?
It ran for 1,000 years.
Oh yeah. Oh gee, yeah, like 25 anyway. I have a boat down here at the marina, and there was an old guy down at the marina, and he was in the pilot for Tiny Talent Time, if you can imagine. He tap danced to T for Two. We did. I remember we did a telethon on Smith and Smith, and it was the apathy telethon. We had an unlisted number.
That's hilarious. Well, you were playing a kid playing the accordion.
Oh God.
And I believe doing oddly for me, I can't remember the name of this old novelty tune, but I believe it was like Sweet Lady of Spain.
Lady of Spain, I adore you. Lady of Spain, I adore you. Lady of Spain, I adore you. There's me there.
That's funny. But in the middle of the song, you kind of look over just like a kid that's just seen himself in the monitor, and you go, "Oh, there I am." Just got distracted by her, and oh my God, it was just so many funny things. But also, it kind of made me nostalgic because CHCH was a part of a time when I was a little kid, not old enough to be making TV, but like it reminded me that CHCH and a lot of local TV stations at that time were places where an entrepreneurial, talented person could go and pitch a TV show and they could make it. And I think sort of legendarily, CHCH out of Hamilton, which has rebranded itself back to CHCH after a number of years out in the wild, did Smith & Smith, Tiny Talent Time we mentioned, but also Billy Van. Did you know Billy Van at all?
Absolutely. I was a Frightenstein.
Hilarious House of Frightenstein, which always struck me as probably a very similar production model to some of the early stuff, because I think he would block shoot each of those.
Absolutely.
Do a week of count and do a week of librarian or whatever. And some of the crew guys on Red Green, actually, because I was obsessed with that show as a kid, some of the crew guys had worked on that show, hadn't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they go overnight. Billy Van would shoot all night. And then by the morning, he's like a blithering idiot trying to, just so, because the makeup was so heavy that once they got it on him, he'd do the whole year's worth of that character at one go. It was just incredible.
Amazing. And
super talent.
Yeah. And then they had Vincent Price come up for a week and shoot all of his little bits and pieces. And I heard that I think the crew guys we were all out for drinks one night after Red Green, and they were telling me that he said, "Oh yeah, Vincent Price came in. He brought us a 2-4. It was about 2 a.m. We were working late. We brought through some beer, and I was just like, what an amazing time in television,
Yeah, I think that was Riff Markowitz was the producer, I think, on that one.
Yes, yeah, and he's still with us.
Is he?
I think so. Yeah, Billy Van is not, but the other thing, I just as an aside on Red Green, had you seen John Candy's Fish and Musician at that point?
I had, yeah.
Yeah, that was a completely different character than Red, but I always loved the angle on that, which was that they would go out and, like Red Fisher, shoot little films of him with celebrity. He'd take out a rock band, like, oh, me and the Tubes are going trout fishing, but it would always end with them around the fire. And then they'd be cooking up the fish, and Gil would have brought himself a little chicken or steak because I don't know what it is. I just don't like the taste of fish.
And here we are at the campsite, and doesn't that smell good?
I'll tell you.
Look at that fish.
It's a real art to cook fish well.
Oh, and the great outdoors. And those were fine drinks you made up, too.
Oh, that's a little bit of Margaritaville for you there. I couldn't believe you put a steak in it.
Well, I just can't stand the taste of fish, Jimmy. I don't know. I can catch them all day, but I can't eat them. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I had created the Red Green character prior to that, but I obviously hadn't done the show prior to that.
Right. Anyway, just to give people a sense of how kind of large that show sort of loomed in early Canadian TV. What, this is sort of an ongoing theme on whatever the hell it is I'm doing here, but I'm always kind of a little backward looking. I'm kind of curious to find out from you. You're growing up watching TV in I won't age you, late 50s, early 60s, let's say. What were you watching, or in the movies or anywhere? What was really what was funny to Steve Smith when you were a kid?
It was a whole different time. It was a whole different kind of humor. And I actually predate television. So I can remember I'm going to say 1951, 52, I had made a crystal radio, and my brother and I slept in bunk beds, and we had the metal springs. So I would use the metal springs as my aerial, and he'd have one walkie-talkie in one ear, and I'd have one in my ear. And we'd lie there in bed listening to Armis Brooks or Burns and Allen or Amos and Andy, those kinds of shows. And the funny thing is, and one of the things I like about doing the podcast now is, I think one of the reasons, I feel I have a pretty good imagination, and I think one of the reasons for that is because of the radio years, not the TV years. Because I had to make the pictures up. I had to create scenes in my own head. And I got really good at that. And when, for instance, when our Miss Brooks came on TV later, like a couple of years later, I was so disappointed. My sets were way better than theirs, you know?
Right.
And Mr.
That must have
Conklin,
been.
Mr. Conklin didn't look like that. You got him all wrong, you know, anyway.
How close did Eve Arden come to your vision of?
Yeah, she was good because she was the same person, you know, and
Right.
Richard Crenna, wasn't he the Dexter? Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, then TV came on, and you know, Ed Sullivan was part of it because the variety aspect of it. There'd be a musical act, and then there'd be a stand-up comic or whatever, or anything would be in there. So that went in here, and a lot of westerns. I mean, you know, Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and all that stuff. That all went in there. Probably my favorite comedy duo were Laurel and Hardy, but that was more from we go to the movies on a Saturday afternoon for 25 cents.
Sure.
And watch those. I just thought they were just a funny, everything sort of understated but crazy. I love that.
Yeah. And I feel like you and I may have talked about Bob and Ray at one point. Were you a
Bob and Ray?
fan?
I have a Bob and Ray CD here. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Talk about guys that would go and go and go. I used to say to my sons, you know, you'll say something and it's funny, and then you just keep saying it and it gets really unfunny. But if you keep saying it long enough, it gets funny again, you know?
Yeah.
That's Bob and Ray. That's Bob and Ray. I'm just going to go down these stairs, and he'll go down 150 stairs, you know?
Or they would do a bit called Matt Neffer, Boy Spot Welder.
Oh yeah.
And Matt Neffer was always disappearing and reappearing in different parts of the house. He's like, I'm over here in the dumbwaiter, Todd.
Well, Matt, I wonder just what's been going through your mind since your last day at the aircraft plant. Whether or not you've had time to think about the future, to plan on what you're going to do now, and, well, to get yourself busy.
I'm here, Todd, in the sewing room on the second floor.
Right. Second floor, did you say, Matt?
Right.
That would be 2 flights.
No. Just the second floor. No, come back down.
Oh, I've gone one too many.
Right.
And then
Yeah. Oh, I know.
I'm going to show you one of my most prized possessions real quick here.
Okay.
Well, a number of years ago, 10 now exactly, I was friendly with one of Bob's granddaughters, Bridie Elliott. Her sister Abby was on SNL for a spell, and of course his son was Chris Elliott.
Chris Elliott, yeah.
At any rate, so through Bridie, I said, I'd love to reach out and write a fan letter. Bob Elliott was still alive. I said, I'd love to reach out and write a fan letter to your grandfather. And she says, well, he doesn't have email, but he does have a mailing address, and so you can write him a note. And he sent me, I don't know if how well the camera can pick this up, but so this is my letter that I received back from Bob and Ray. A vintage card, and that is a vintage fan club down there, and just a lovely note, and it has a place of pride here because that's
fantastic. Wow.
You know, obviously, you know, before my time, but I remember I was in New York once in my 20s, went to the Museum of Broadcasting, and upstairs on the top floor they had a retrospective of Bob and Ray, and I put on a set of headphones and I just started listening to the stuff. I'd never heard them before, and I thought, this is the funniest freaking thing I've ever heard. And certainly from that era, because if you listen to the Colgate Comedy Hour or Bob Hope or whatever, you know, some of it's pretty corny, but not corny at all.
No.
Right? So understated, so dry.
Yeah.
Never pushy.
No, never. It's your job. You got to come to them. You know, I like that. That's the way I find British humor is generally is that you have to come to them. I find American humor, they're right in your face, come right over to the couch.
Right.
Canadian kind of, they'll meet you halfway across the coffee table, you know?
Yes.
They won't come all the way. You got to make a bit of an effort.
Well, I've always described, speaking of radio, I've often, when I've described the show to folks down here who haven't seen it, I often say it was sort of a sitcom, sort of a sketch, but in a lot of ways, it was kind of like the Jack Benny show, because you were coming out, there was no fourth wall. You were directly addressing the audience, and anybody who was interacting with you also knew that the audience was there.
Right. That's true. Jack Benny's a great comparison.
Yeah, and you were able to, because you were able to do so much with a reaction or just a little look, and then Patrick could go out there and really sweat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that when the audience gets a chance to realize what you're thinking. They find that a lot funnier than hearing what you're saying, you know?